Good evening, listeners. It's me, your host, RamblingRamm. I'm here with some more stories to scare, shock, and horrify you. Or possibly, just possibly, let you know what's really out there in the dark. Enjoy, listeners. Askew by Opinionated IMO. At first it was subtle, the things that were moved about. The toothbrush or the soap dish, just little things like that. He had a place for everything, and it was obvious when something had been moved around. What wasn't obvious was who moved them. You see, he lived alone, always had, so that didn't really allow for a logical explanation. Once you eliminate logic, that only leaves illogical possibles. All sorts of improbable scenarios played out in his head. Leprechauns, elves, fairies, demons. Even if he could get past their mythical status, it just didn't seem likely. Why would any enchanted creature waste their time on such mundane mischief? The truth was, if such legendary beings were going to reveal themselves to him, he expected a grand gesture. Finding the toothpaste on the wrong side of the sink didn't rate the risk of violating their rules of deniability. He figured that sacred oath was only breached in the rarest of circumstances. Go big or go home, right? The frequency of these curious incidents increased. More and more he found items around his home in the wrong place. The twist tie was left off the bread wrapper. The milk carton was in a door pocket instead of the top shelf. The toilet seat and lid were both down. As fastidious and meticulous as he was in his daily routines, each time it happened made him furious at first, and then a little amused. He became obsessed at the idea of catching the inhuman tricksters in the act, but had no practical means of doing so. At first he tried pretending to be asleep. When that failed to yield any suspects, he faked a full departure from his home so he could observe their chicanery, sight unseen. To his disappointment, he was never able to catch the rascals moving his things around. On the positive side of things, his increased state of vigilance prevented any new incidents. Only when he was really asleep did the pranks continue. Somehow, they knew when he was faking. Though not particularly tech-savvy, he installed a motion-detecting night vision camcorder in the hall to record any evidence. That night he went to bed in hopes that the mystery of the mischief makers would soon be over. His thoughts were restless and filled with apprehension. Not knowing what creature or beast were behind the modest acts of rebellion was troubling. He just hoped that finding out the truth wasn't actually worse than not knowing. The next morning he was in for a real surprise. Sometime during the night, the camcorder had been tossed across the room and destroyed. Its smashed pieces on the floor were the first indisputable evidence that he wasn't just imagining the whole thing. The nocturnal vandals were not subtle at all about their displeasure. Clearly they wanted to be left out of the spotlight. Ironically, destroying the camera itself didn't mean that the recorded event was erased. With any luck, it had still captured the events that led up to its destruction. He nervously fumbled with cables to connect the gadget to his computer. That level of concentration required that he pour himself a large cup of coffee from the programmed coffee maker. Once he had the software up and running, he was filled with dread. There were 3 motion-activated entries recorded. His finger hovered indecisively over the play button for a few moments as he sipped his morning elixir. At last, he clicked the button before he had a chance to back out. In the darkened hallway, he saw a shadowy form approaching. At first, he thought the artificially illuminated figure was some sort of wandering ghost. As the poltergeist intruder drew nearer to the camera's viewing threshold, far more revealing details became apparent. The smiling ghoul with blank eyes walking directly toward the camera lens, and then stopped. It was none other than himself, in a deep sleep, in a trance, or possessed by evil spirits he did not know, but the first part of the mystery had been solved. For some baffling reason, he himself was the mischief maker. His nocturnal doppelganger either didn't share his zeal for order, or disliked his waking choices to maintain it. After all of the fearsome scenarios he considered, the recorded truth was infinitely more frightening to his delicate sensibilities. Seeing his own chilling grin in the greenish dark footage made his hair stand on end. The unconscious version of himself knew that he was being recorded, and simply didn't care. It was that shocking self-awareness that chilled his blood. Whatever the underlying agenda was for all of the foolishness, he did not know, but the night version of himself did. Slowly he reached to play the second entry. The sleeping ghoul shuffled past the hall camera and went into the utility room for unknown reasons. A few moments later, his unconscious self reappeared with a small box in hand, and then went into the kitchen. Both times he would be outside of the camera's range for a moment, and then reappear to complete the unknown mission. The second entry ended as his unconscious self returned to the bedroom. He already knew that the final entry ended with the camera being tossed to the floor, but he was curious as to what triggered it. By staring directly at the lens, the sleepwalking version of himself already knew about it. Why would he perform this obvious one-sided dance around the surveillance, and then destroy the camera after 2 other recordings were captured? It didn't make sense, but he had to know. The final event took place 3 hours beforehand. Still very dark, he watched as his unconscious body sauntered by the lens in zombie-like indifference. In his hand he was able to make out a box of rat poison that had been stored in the garage. In the other was his coffee filter. In a stunning example of conflicted self-interest, the unblinking ghoul mixed the deadly strychnine into his pre-measured coffee grounds, the very ones used to make the coffee he was now sipping from. For the very last time, the smiling assassin made direct eye contact with the lens, and tossed the camcorder against the wall. His sleepwalking self was a suicidal murderer. The Shadows of My Youth by Arkwolves. I feel the need to get this story out there. Things have been happening recently. It's all linked. It all started in my first house, and now it follows me from place to place. I don't know what to do anymore. Maybe someone here knows. Let me start at the beginning. The house I grew up in had always been a little odd. We had moved there when I was 7. my mother and her fiancé taking over the place to run the catering business that was attached. The work was long and hard and kept them working from 12 p.m. until well after midnight on function nights. It was an interesting childhood, where I had both too much and too little freedom. My evenings dedicated to helping clean, polish and do dishes, while my nights were spent unsupervised, with only my dog Millie for company. Strange things started happening there not long after we moved in, and I'll recount them to the best of my ability below. It all began with my bedroom door. It was an old house we lived in, and no surprises, it was a little drafty. My bedroom door banged and clashed several times a day, always startling me and sending my heart fluttering. One particular incident comes to mind. I was sitting on my bed, pretty upset about the round of bullying I'd already received that day in school, having always been the weird, unsociable kid. Slowly the tears started falling. I sat on the edge of my bed, crying. My mother totally unaware of the emotional trauma I was currently reliving when I heard a noise. The bedroom door creaked open slowly, and the handle turned, and I looked for the comfort of an adult, only to find no one was there. The door shut pendulously and left me sitting, terrified as the handle sprang back up into place as it clicked shut. Moments later I felt a weight move the mattress to my right as someone sat down next to me, only to find no one was there. Terror raced through me, and I immediately threw my bedroom door open and pounded down the stairs, skidding with speed into the living room to find Millie, my dog, standing in the living room door. I slipped past her in panic and crept behind the huge L-shaped sofa, shivering in fear, only to hear her powerful growl ripple out into the hallway, snarling like I had never heard her snarl. Somewhere in the house there was a slam, as if from a door. Somewhere in the house something was upset. The feeling of nauseous fear was palpable, the hairs standing up all over my body as I quivered and stifled my sobs. I slept on the sofa that night, with Millie lying, her head on my lap, protecting me until my mother finished her shift in the kitchen. I remember some lie about falling asleep watching TV and was shuffled into my bedroom alone. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I began to sleep as much as I could in the living room, going up to bed only when my mother was about to finish up in the kitchen, waking up at 5 a.m. to watch kids' TV, the only show on at the time being The Magic Roundabout, which I hated, but was better than sitting in silence. The sense of dread surrounding the hallway going to my bedroom took almost a month to fade back into obscurity, but the memory remained. Meanwhile, the work was hard on my mother and her fiancé. They ended up splitting, the toll on their relationship too great, and my mother was left to run the place herself. My grandfather and grandmother helped, my grandmother running the bar attached to the facility, while my grandfather helped out a little in the kitchen. But they too only stayed until 10 p.m, when they finally vacated and took the 20-minute drive home, when my mother was left with all of the rest to do. I spent as much time finding excuses to help in the kitchen as possible, doing dishes, peeling potatoes, or helping cook. It's there I got my cooking skills I still have today, but it was never enough, and my mother, being a responsible adult, would send me to bed again, in the house attached, alone. I had one true friend, my best friend in school, almost since I had moved here. She was nerdy like me, and a social outcast, so we fit together well. When we were around 8 or 9, we were allowed sleepovers. It was then the trouble started again. With company, I was far more comfortable in my room, and we would play PS1 or listen to music late into the night. It was then my door started slamming again. We had been running around the hallway in the dark, messing around, and had finally retreated to the safety of my bedroom with a faint sense of unease. Just as we closed the door and went to sit in the chairs under my newly built loft bed, the door opened again. Only a few centimeters, but enough for us to notice. It slammed forcefully and made both of us jump, staring blankly, only for it to open and slam again. The rhythm became faster, louder, slamming and banging and leaving us screaming. Luckily, my mother had been coming to check on us to see if we wanted a snack. She heard the slamming and the dog barking. She shouted up the stairs, "What the hell are you two doing?" The door stopped instantly. When she came up to the bedroom, she found us in a hell of a state, both terrified. We were allowed to sleep in the living room with the dog that night. This was an escalation. From this point on, there was little rest for anyone in the house. Whispering echoed in the hallway, audible even with the TV on in the living room. I was no longer the only one who heard it. Dark voices filled the hall night or day. My mother and grandmother saw a shadow shape walk across the living room, stop and look at them in the broad light of day. Now, my mother grew up Catholic, but in recent years had been flirted with becoming pagan. It had always appealed to her, and now seemed the right time to practice. After being woken up for the second time to the sounds of the TV being turned on in the living room, only to find everything off when she went down, she finally decided enough was enough and purified the house. It smelled of sage and salt water for a long time after I came home from school. That bought us a quiet few months, during which time my mother had found a new boyfriend. A nice guy who was a little young, but polite, and looked after me as best he could. He showed me a lot of kindness, the weird kid who spent more time alone than talking. He was the first one to get hurt. He had been walking up the stairs when he felt it, a hand on his shoulder. Turning his head to check for someone, he was slammed face first into the stairs, right outside my bedroom door, and held pinned. He couldn't breathe or move, his heart in a vice grip. He was there for several minutes before the dog barking alerted my mother. She took him to hospital, fearing a heart attack despite his age, but nothing showed on the scans. No one could explain the incident, so it was put in the box along with all of the other disquieting stories from our house. He was nervous in the house. He felt unwelcome and unwanted. He began spending time either in my mother's company or mine, fearing to be alone. It wouldn't be the last time that he was attacked. They see us, by and hiding. I like to think of myself as a rational person, always looking for evidence before buying into anything. No belief in the supernatural to speak of, but our world, our reality itself, is home to things that defy explanation. This isn't a tale of me experiencing something creepy as a child. This was only a few years ago. I'd been browsing the internet, looking for a cheap car. Not to drive, but to take apart. So it actually functioning wasn't required. It's kind of my hobby. Odd, I know. Anyway, I find this site similar to Craigslist, but supposedly less creepy. On the site I see an old Pontiac for sale. $100 is a great bargain since I'm just taking it to pieces. So I get in touch with the seller. We have this very civil, very nice back and forth. He tells me that the car belonged to his brother, but because he ran away, supposedly to avoid a warrant, the vehicle was up for sale. Taking down his address, I tell him I'll be out the next day. It's maybe a 3-hour drive from my house, and I have a flatbed I can pull the thing onto. Early the next morning I head out. The drive is uneventful, mostly me singing badly along with the radio. The place is out in the middle of nowhere, but not the creepy kind. More the quaint little farm kind. Meeting me by the barn is the seller. We'll call him Tom. Tom says he has to go find the title and keys, so he'll be a bit. Guess he figured no one would buy the thing. After he heads inside, I decided to take a look around. Not snooping, just mostly curious. I'm a city kid. Never even visited a farm until I was in my late teens. The place is nice and spacious, but I noticed this shed behind the barn, a decent bit away. Figured it might be an old outhouse or something. Worth a look while I wait, right? I walk toward the thing and start feeling sick, like food poisoning sick. Nauseous and blurred vision. When I reach the shed, I notice 4 bolts on the outside, so I unhook them and open the door. Nothing there. The shed was totally empty. Feeling a bit disappointed, I headed back for the barn, just barely getting to the car before Tom comes out with the title and keys. We exchange goods, money for car, and all the things that come with it. Then I pull it onto my flatbed and head back home. The drive home was pretty much the same, except my stereo kept getting static. Like the stations weren't coming in right. I figured it was just because I was out in the middle of nowhere. Aside from that, the drive was fine. I get back home and lower the car into my garage, so I'll have access to all my tools. After the long drive, I decided I'd take it easy and devote the next day to tinkering with the car. I had a 3-day weekend, so I had plenty of time. I went to bed that night looking forward to starting in on the car the next morning. I must have been sound asleep maybe an hour or 2 when I heard it. A gurgling sound, like someone choking. Sitting up in bed I look around, but saw nobody. Pulling the little snub nose I keep in the bedside table, I headed out of my room, carefully checking each room. The sound grew louder as I approached the door to the garage. Taking a breath, I pushed the door open, my blood immediately running cold, heart turning to ice. The trunk of the car was open. and a corpse was hanging halfway out of it, clawing at the floor. I made the only sound I could, a faint and very terrified which drew attention to myself. It looked at me with sunken eyes, reaching for me. What remained of its face wasn't curled into a snarl. It looked almost concerned. "They see us," it spoke. I was stuck motionless in place, unable to do anything. "They see us, and he helped them do it." It finally got free of the trunk, rising to its feet and shambling toward me. At that moment, every deer in headlights moment I saw in horror movies made perfect sense. It grabbed the hand holding my revolver, lifting it and speaking with a pleading tone. "Use this. Stop him before he lets another through." I woke with a start when my alarm clock went off, falling out of bed and knocking my lamp off the table. I immediately went for my snub nose and stormed to the garage. Opening the trunk, I found it empty. As I turned, thinking it was a dream, my bare foot stepped in something. Blood? Right where the corpse had been climbing out of the trunk in my dream. The phone rang, jolting me into motion. "Hey, this is Tom. Look, I got up this morning and noticed my shed was open. Was that you?" Clearing my throat, I confirmed it was. When he spoke up, he sounded happy. "All right, thanks for telling me the truth." Right as he hung up, I felt it again. The same nausea and dizziness as I had when I approached the shed. This time a smell came with it, like wet, rotting wood. Deciding it wise to just strip the car quickly and have all this behind me, I got to work. The car was small, so it didn't take long. But something kept bothering me as I worked. I'd find small holes in some parts, like they'd been shot. The body itself looked fine, but some of the parts under the hood definitely had bullet holes in them. I, at the time, thought maybe Tom's brother had used the car in a crime, and that's why it went for so cheap. I wish I'd been right. It took me most of the day to take the thing apart, selling pieces of it to various scrapyards. Figuring that I'd be fine now that the car was gone, I turned in early for bed. I woke up to the sound of someone crying, and those same choking noises as the night before. Feeling my heart fill with dread, I went out to investigate, snub-nose in hand. There, in my living room, was the corpse. It was kneeling and sobbing. When I made a noise, it looked at me, shaking its head slowly. "I was too late. He sold the car later than I expected. They can see us. And now they're here." Suddenly my house was filled with this terrified, desperate scream. Then the corpse faded away. Waking the next day, I immediately felt sick. Dizzy, nauseous, and incredibly anxious. Like my nerves were all exposed and raw. Grabbing up my keys, I decided I needed answers. The 3-hour drive took me less than 2. When I pulled into the farm, I saw Tom's vehicle gone. Taking my chance, I parked behind some trees and out of sight. First order of business, lock that shed. Once that was done, I headed for the house. Trying the knob, I found it unlocked. Walking inside, I gazed around the sparse decorations, but something drew my eye. A photo of Tom with another man. The corpse. Even with its rotted visage, I knew the face. A voice rang out behind me, dripping with malice. So, my brother was still in the car after all. Turning slowly, I saw Tom sitting in a recliner in the corner, hidden from line of sight from the doorway. A hunting rifle rested in his lap. He never could mind his own business, always preaching to me about how I didn't know what I was doing. But I'm alive, and he isn't. Tom raised the rifle and fired, narrowly missing my head. Following the path of the bullet, I saw the size of the hole left in the wall. Tom was the one who shot up the car, not his brother. Shame he got you involved. They don't like outsiders. When he went to eject his spent cartridge, I ran. Out the front door, across the driveway, weaving and zigzagging as best I could. Didn't stop a burning pain from finding my leg. They've waited a long time for this. Limping away, I heard a bullet zip past my head, stopping me in place. Turning slow, I prepared to face my death. But behind Tom was the corpse, his brother. Slowly turning himself, Tom tried to fire, but his brother slapped the rifle away. Brother, it may be too late to stop them, but I can still stop you. That scream from the night before filled the air. Tom's brother looking as horrified as a corpse can. Run! They see you. Limping to my car, I turned the ignition, looking through my windshield in time to see the shed sink into the ground. A large thing pulling itself out of the hole. Throwing my car in reverse, I floored it out of there. I don't know what happened to Tom or his brother. I gathered the courage to go back the next weekend, making sure to go armed. The entire place looked like it had been torn apart, and the hole was gone. But now I know. I said before I had no belief in the supernatural. I still don't. I can't explain what happened, and I don't want to. Not yet. I've been preparing in case that thing comes after me. Because whatever it is, there are more. I feel it. Like a person knows when they're being watched. The tension. The anticipation. The fear. More are coming. We're not ready. Because maybe, for the first time, they see us. Well, listeners, I sincerely hope you enjoyed the tales that I brought you this evening. It would be a great pleasure to me if you would like, comment, and subscribe, if you're not already a subscriber. And please wait for me to bring you more tales to alter your perception of how the world may really be. This is RamblingRamm, signing off. Good night, listeners, and sweet dreams.